Good morning, everybody. Good morning. It's so good to see everybody again. We are very fortunate this morning to have John Rose on hand to provide you with a unique dimension of academic life at UNC. John is professor of practice at the School of Civic Life and Leadership, and he's nationally known expert on teaching civil discourse. And he currently directs the Foundation's Dialogue and Discourse program. While we know you have plans to visit classes and explore academic life across campus today, we thought we'd take advantage and set a great tone by bringing a professor straight to the Carolina Inn for you. I'm very pleased to welcome and introduce to you Professor John Rose. Class is now in session.
Session, that's great. By nationally known, he means it's hard to get out of the zip code without running into somebody who's maybe possibly heard of me. So I'm not a big deal. Well, thanks for coming out. It's great to see all these young faces. It's so exciting. One neat thing about being an academic is that there is a continuous injection of new life into your workplace. Students come and go, we stay, and y'all keep me young. You also keep me old because I feel older as the years go by. You all look younger. I mean, technically speaking, students always come in year after year at the same age, but you look younger to me. My work is in civil discourse and addressing problems of political polarization. But given that I have a little time with you, I wanted to say something more about maybe the life of virtue. I started up writing this talk thinking I'd say something insightful about our current political situation, and I ended up writing what amounts to advice to young adults like yourself, like one of those patronizing commencement addresses. And I didn't mean it to be that. I just want to speak plainly. So forgive me, I don't mean to sermonize. Indeed, I am so far from perfect that I hesitate to give any kind of advice. But having spent a lot of time with a lot of young people over the last 9 years, I've observed things about the current state of young Americans trying to make their way in our country and in our meritocracy. And I can't help but tell you a few things that might just help you. First, just by way of background, any Midwesterners in the room? Hey, there we go. Nice. All right. I am a Midwesterner. I didn't attend fancy schools. I did a PhD in theology, which makes me an unlikely person to teach classes about politics or, well, the sorts of things I teach on. Dispositionally, I would say, my wife would say, I'm a non-confrontational introvert. Any of those in the room? See, they won't raise their hands. Oh, right, there you go. There are more of them, I assure you. Which makes me an unlikely person to do the sort of work that I do. I run to the fires, and I ask people, what can't we talk about? Let's talk about that. And I get in front of rooms like this. But it isn't my nature. I have trouble looking at people in the eyes. So if I'm looking down, it's not that I'm uninterested in what I'm doing, it's just who I am. All right. So now, the unsolicited advice. I really hope this isn't like a commencement address, because I've been to a lot of commencement addresses, and I can't remember any of them. Not a single one. If you ask me what got said, it's just like platitude after platitude. It's a total waste of time. Okay. I'm going to ask you something. Be less righteous. You didn't think I was going to say that, did you? Be less righteous. When I meet young people who are about to go off to college, especially those competing for prestigious scholarships, what I hear from them over and over again is their plan to change the world. You all want to change the world, make it a better place, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But before you can do that and do it well and know really what needs changing and how to change it, you first need to learn how to change your own minds. You need to learn how to change yourself. Leave the world for later. You first need to have minds worth making up. A lot of you want to be leaders. That's how you get to be a Morehead-Cain scholar. But to be a good leader, you first need to learn how to follow. Don't be so eager to have made up your own minds about what's wrong with the world and how to fix it. This is going to require a little bit more humility on your part. Over the course of your life, you're going to have to learn how to be more honest about your shortcomings. There was a phrase that was used when I was a graduate student among the Princeton undergraduates. Effortless perfection. Ever heard this phrase? Effortless perfection? Okay. Well, both of those words are lies. It's not effortless, and you're not perfect. You're quite fallible, and I can tell that by looking at all of you around this room right now. You look different in certain ways, but one thing you all have in common is that you're all human. I can see that from up here. You're all human. I myself have done many things wrong in my life, gotten many things wrong. I've had to update my beliefs time and time again. If you knew everything I'd ever said or thought or done, you'd probably say, who's this guy to get up on stage and use the word virtue? But I suspect that's true of all of you as well. So be more honest about your own mistakes, your own shortcomings. Try to talk to and befriend students, young people who think differently. Don't think about the world in terms of us and them, this clean division, good guys, bad guys. When you think about us and them, do it preferably in the context of sports. That's pretty harmless. Like, you can hate Duke. By the way, one of my favorite t-shirts, if you all come here, but you should all come to UNC, whether you're Morehead scholars or not. Come to UNC. But one of my favorite UNC t-shirts has a picture of a silhouette of a Duke Blue Devil, and then it says, have you all seen this? Do you know what it says? It says, "Not today, Satan." Whatever student came up with that just deserves an A in everything. Straight A's. When it comes to sports, it's fine. Us and them. It's harmless. But when it comes to your fellow students, God willing, your fellow Tar Heels, it isn't us and them. It's people who see the world differently, who show up differently, who have different stories, have made sense of things in different ways. And those same people are future colleagues, future friends, maybe even future spouses. They are not foes to be canceled. They're your fellow human beings. Take a break from the meritocracy. I know this is ironic, given the setting right now, right? I get that. But I want to be honest, it's not all it's cracked up to be. Your parents may or may not want me to tell you this, but the greatest sources of happiness in your life are ultimately not going to be those 10 seconds after you found out that you were admitted into this or that, or even walking across the graduation stage. The things that count in the end are what David Brooks calls eulogy virtues, not resume virtues. You are not your resume. The most important source of happiness in your life will almost certainly be your relationships with other people. That will determine the narrative arc of your life. when you're, I was about to say when you're at your eulogy, you're not going to be at your eulogy. When others are at your eulogy, none of them are going to mention the fact that you were possibly a Morehead-Cain scholar, or went to Stanford Medical School, or landed a prestigious internship at McKinsey, or a Rhodes Scholar. Nobody gives a damn. Those things don't matter in the end, right? If they don't matter in the end, we should stop acting like they are the most important thing now. You are not defined by your resume. And I'll say this, for most people, the greatest source of purpose in life, sense of purpose, is to be found, for most of us, in marriage and children. The most important decision you make in your life is not where you go to college or which job you choose of the three, right? Doctor, attorney, or what's the other one? Consultant? It's not. It's who you marry, it's what kind of spouse you are, it's what kind of mother or father you become. By the way, this message wasn't pre-approved by Morehead-Cain. I don't know that I'm saying what I'm supposed to say here. But I'm trying to be real with you, right? I mean, that's what I'm trying to say, be real. Get offline. Flesh and blood matter. We're embodied creatures. Any of you in high schools where there are no cell phones allowed in there? Yeah, show of hands, okay. I think that's a good thing. Yeah, I get some claps over there. Not bad, not bad. By the way, this just seems like a stream of consciousness, doesn't it? Of like advice from this guy, I don't know. Be aware of your own motivated reasoning. We do this all the time. And this is very true when it comes to our own politics, our own activities in the culture wars, if you are active in them, is that we approach something, a new piece of evidence, an event in the news, or you hear a remark from somebody, and you don't listen. Not really. Or we don't listen. I do this too. Instead, what you do is you listen to formulate your own response, to try to figure out how you can defend or advance what you already know to be the case, what your narrative already is, instead of truly listening to another person, saying, maybe they're right about this. Maybe there's like a gem of wisdom here from an unlikely source. When we engage in motivated reasoning, we approach something and we ask ourselves if we want to believe it or not believe it. We ask ourselves one of these two questions. Can I believe this? If you really want to believe it. Or must I believe this? If you don't want to believe it. When in fact the right question is, what's the right question? Is it true? Is it true? Like, this is one of the hardest things in life, is just to be honest. Be honest with yourself. Be honest about what you're experiencing. Try to keep politics in its proper place. So I just said that I teach classes about politics, and now I'm saying something like keep politics in its proper place. But this is what I've learned. This is what I've learned. You all, 18, 19, I think every election you've been part of, you've been alive for, has been the most important election of our lives. You ever notice this? This is exhausting. I, for one, would like an election that's less important. Put not thy trust in politicians. They can't heal your souls. Don't marry a political party or a politician or even a political identity. Marry a person. Hold your identity lightly. Holding an identity lightly means thinking of it in a matter-of-fact way, rather than as a central source of pride or meaning in your life. It's a description, not a flag to be waved proudly. It means treating an identity as somewhat contingent, saying to yourself, for instance, I'm a liberal for as long as it continues to me that liberalism is just. Or this from Julia Galef, an author I recommend. I'm a feminist, but I would abandon the movement if for some reason I came to believe it was causing net harm. Holding a belief lightly means maintaining a sense of your own beliefs and values independent of your tribe's beliefs and values, and acknowledging, at least in the privacy of your own head, the places where those two things diverge. We think so much in terms of identity in higher education and the meritocracy, right? I mean, they'll ask you who you are, and you've thought a lot about this. But when it comes to how you see the world, don't let your identity, and particularly identity described in terms given to you by other people, determine what you believe about the world. It should work the other way around. That is to say, let your identities follow from your experiences, not the other way around. You don't need to hold certain positions by virtue of your place on, for instance, the intersectional grid of race, gender, and sexuality. Don't let others, don't force that on others either. Let your political views determine your political identities. Don't ask this question: what's my team say on this issue? It's like, hey, I'm a progressive. Like, what do we think about this, guys? Don't do that. Ask yourself instead, what do I think? What do I think? If you agree with every last tenet of a, let's say, school of politics, a camp, and don't have a single reservation about your party's position on a single issue, chances are you're probably thinking too much with your party and not for yourself. So don't make an identity out of what you oppose or whom you oppose. Opposing things is fine, but first remember what you are for. When I say you should make politics matter less, I don't mean that we should look the other way at injustices or give up trying to make the world more just. Don't hear me as saying that. That's not what I mean. What I mean is, don't let politics be the most important thing in your lives. Politics exists for us and not the other way around. David Brooks, New York Times columnist, once said that politics is a little bit like a drug. The more you give of yourself to it, the more it demands of you, and the less it gives back, until in the end you're giving everything and you're getting nothing back. You probably have seen people online about whom this is true. Not everything in life is political or should be political. Much of human experience isn't. Arguably, the best of it. The best of it is non-political, or maybe I could say pre-political. Things like love, friendship, beauty. Some scholars insist that everything's political, and if by this is meant that there's some power dynamic present in every relationship, that's arguably true. It's also the case that these relationships are never fully describable in terms of power. And it's these other features that make these spheres of life wonderful. It's what makes love love. It's what makes beauty a visitor from an alien planet. It's the delight of a great joke shared with a real friend. About laughing. We've done a little bit of laughing this morning. Do more of it. Do more of it. This is like my life advice to you. You're going to need it for your own psychic survival. Like, existence is absurd. Things are going to happen. You're going to have to cope. Never lose your sense of humor. I think it is not a coincidence that the most politically intolerant people in our society, whether left, right, whatever, are humorless. Like, they can't laugh at themselves. They can't take a joke. This is authoritarian regimes always come for humor. You cannot make a joke. It's a great, I like to say, if you can laugh together, you can talk together. You can talk together, you can probably disagree. If you can disagree, then we can work together, even if we don't see the world the same way. So do more laughing. When you have hard political conversations, assume goodwill on the part of your interlocutors, whether they are people you're talking to or authors. Now, you might say, wow, Dr. Rose, some people are bad will. Some people hold views for reasons that end in isms, and that's bad. And they might claim to not be doing that, but they really are. To which I say, that is true sometimes. But this has been what I've learned over time, teaching civil discourse in the classroom, or just dealing with people in the world. For the sake of keeping alive conversation, for the sake of keeping alive the possibility of friendship, the possibility of persuading another, the possibility of unity, agreement, give people the benefit of the doubt. Don't attribute motives to beliefs that they don't claim to hold. Does that make sense? It's really important. And the other wonderful thing about that is that then it rubs off on other people, and then you can begin to expect it, that same treatment, right? And that's a wonderful thing, because you feel free to speak. And nobody has ever, in the history of humanity, ever changed their mind after somebody said, no, you really believe that because you're this horrible thing. And they're like, you know what, you're right. I hereby renounce my prior beliefs and agree with. That's just never happened, never. When trying to change somebody's mind, try to avoid unnecessarily embarrassing them. Whatever you do, don't humiliate them. A book I recommend, Amanda Ripley's High Conflict, looks at what leads to what she calls high conflict situations around the world. And one common precondition she found was that some party was humiliated. When you humiliate people, you make them an enemy for a long time. I have a buddy who likes to use this phrase when correcting somebody, because you do have to sometimes gently correct people, right? And the phrase he uses is this: friend, come up higher. Friend, come up higher. I love this, right? Because if you think about it, yes, there's correction, but there's also compliment. A couple compliments. One, you're my friend, or I want you to be my friend. Two, you're made for better. Like, I don't want to cast you out. This is sort of canceling, like you're forever out, you can never come back in. You have the scarlet letter. It's like, no, I want you. I want you to be with me, with us. Friend, come up higher. Never lose sight of the humanity and dignity of other groups of people with whom you're in conflict, even when, especially when, they seem to be losing sight of your humanity or dignity, or the humanity and dignity of your group. Boy, that's hard. That is really hard to do. Know this: conversation about contentious political topics is possible. Don't let anybody tell you it isn't. Don't let anybody tell you you can't have a conversation about that issue, at least not in a way where you can admit different sides. Or you can't try to talk to that person or those people. If and when somebody does say that to you, be prepared to say, just watch me. Be honest about human nature. We all like to present ourselves in ways that, let's say, are edited, almost like a film production. We project certain things. And when I think about things like scholarship admissions, it's as if the danger is that we're kind of auditioning for parts, and you, instead of coming to us and telling us who you are instead thinking something like, well, tell me who you want me to be so that you give me the scholarship. Okay, don't do that. Don't do that. It's not good for your soul, because it's not truthful. But also, you'll develop the wrong sorts of habits of thinking of your value in terms of what other people think of you, or they're allowing others to determine who you really are. And on that point about who you really are, it takes time in life to know. I mean, I think it's in some ways unfortunate that like such a common, this is true of universities, kind of application essay question is like, tell me about who you are, because honestly, it's something you realize throughout life, and as a young person, it's a little bit hard to tell. But I'll tell you this about who we are. We're all like really, really dependent creatures, fragile. We need other people to get us through life. We're not as independent or as autonomous as we might like to think that we are. Now, I've promised, I meant to, that I'm going to say a little bit about virtue before I get to questions and answers. I've been talking the language of virtue for the last 20 minutes, but I want to single out a few what I think of are important virtues. And these are the virtues that I think, one, can help us in discourse in these polarized times, but two, they are the things, I mentioned eulogy virtues, that are going to help you in life as you travel through this meritocracy to always know, like, what this is my proposal to you. You can take it or leave it. But, like, what am I doing? Like, what is the narrative of my life? Like, when I say that I'm growing or that I'm doing well or that I've got off track, what the heck do I mean by that? I can't just mean I'm doing well in school. So I want you to consider thinking about life and flourishing in terms of virtue. So one virtue to pursue is curiosity. Curiosity means like thinking in real time. Don't go into classes or any settings with these prepackaged conclusions like I already know where I have to get because that's socially acceptable, or I think that's what the teacher wants to hear. Be curious enough to follow developing arguments in your own mind wherever they may lead. When somebody says to you something that you're like, what the heck? Like, how could you think that, right? Don't say, what the heck? How could you think that? Instead say, tell me more about why you think that, in a way that invites the person to share more instead of shutting down the conversation. There's a misconception out there that like hearing that is somehow gonna like harm you, like, or that, oh, now that view is gonna spread everywhere. I disagree with this. I've been in a classroom with hundreds of hours talking with students and asking, tell me what you actually think, right? As a consequence of that, I've not had people come out with like fatal wounds or like somehow campus is now awash in like horrible ideologies. That's not what happens. And that's not what's going to happen to you. Instead, you're going to have an encounter with another human being where you learn a little bit more about the world and what other people think, and maybe about yourself. So remain curious. Part of being curious also means you don't stop others from having certain positions or being able to talk on something because of their identity. Coming back to this identity thing, like, well, you can't talk on that because you're a man or you're white or whatever it is. Just say, I'm curious, what do you think? In her book, with a great title, I Never Thought of It That Way, Monica Guzman talks about how a really like uncomfortable, charged conversation can be turned around on a dime when somebody asks a really sincere, probing question. You know what I'm talking about? Like, I was like, ooh, it's really tense, and then somebody's like, well, I'm trying to figure this out. Like, what about that? And you can tell it's just honest, and they're like just trying to get to the truth of things. Boy, does that do wonders for a conversation, because what it reveals is that this person isn't trying to own the other side or whatever, but rather he or she's just like trying to get closer to the truth of the matter. It's a very powerful thing. Virtues are contagious. I've seen this time and time again in my class. So whether you're, being curious and humble and all these things or not, you're actually always creating some kind of snowball effect with the people around you. So vices and virtues are both contagious. Come as you are. Come as you are. I have a very lenient free speech policy in my class. I would recommend that you choose classes about which this is true. You can ask other students. Just put yourself out there. Work to create trust with other people. We live in like a really low trust time in our country, and trust is something that's earned, and it's earned by treating each other well. One way we can do this is to be more charitable with each other. Charity, and I'm going to end talking about charity, is to me the most important virtue. Thomas Aquinas said it's the mother, the root, and the form of all the other virtues. It's really cool. So like it sustains the others. At their root, all the others come back to charity. Different ways to define charity, but one way I like to define it is this. It's to will the good of the other. And think about how in our current political times we talk about the other, people who disagree, in terms that make clear that we do not care about their goodwill, their well-being. We really don't. In fact, it almost seems like we want them to suffer, right? But true human charity means willing their good, wanting them to flourish, even if they've been bad to you or your group of people. Consider the following. Well, let me go here. Some students will tell me, look, Dr. Rose, like I couldn't possibly love my fellow human beings. I can't will the good of another human being who wants to take my rights away or wants to, or thinks less of me. You know, sometimes my students say, look, this thing about like loving your enemies, sometimes the phrase they use, it's like a sucker's game, or maybe even morally problematic. And respond to that, I want to turn to, and I'll finish on this. One of my heroes in life, Martin Luther King Jr., who I think shows us how to love our enemies. He shows us the power of the virtue of charity for changing our political situations and for making sure our souls are rightly oriented. So what does King say? He's going to show us how to love our enemies. He says we must discover the element of good in other people. By the way, this whole talk started out with like meritocracy and all that, and now I'm at charity. That's all right. It's all connected. To love our enemies, King says, discover the element of good in them. And every time you begin to hate a person and think of hating them, realize that there's some good there too. See, says King, that there is a mix of good and bad in you too. Something I mentioned earlier. And then he says the following. Whenever I've read this quote aloud in public like 50 times, and every time I read it, I'm just astonished. Okay, so this is what King says. We, all of us, are split up and divided against ourselves. There is something of a civil war going on within all of our lives. There is a recalcitrant south of our soul revolting against the north of our soul. And there is this continual struggle within the very structure of every individual life, unquote. Wow, that is astonishing. Just think about that. Given his context, given the oppression of his people at that time, he said that. He said that, and yet remember the very first thing I said in my remarks was like, so many of us are given to being like really righteous. Like our side is right, we are pure, the other side is evil. That's not what King says. What King says is that the great drama of your life, the narrative arc, the things you're going to think about on your deathbed, it's not going to be about politics. It's going to be about the civil war in your heart. The battle line between good and evil runs through every individual heart, Solzhenitsyn said. King says that's the thing you got to keep your eye on, not whether you get into Harvard or whatever. That's the thing. King says we must love our enemies because hating in response to a wrong only intensifies the existence of hate in the universe. Hate begets more hate. It's almost like a substance that grows. We talk a lot about fighting hate in our modern political moment. But I would ask you, Are you fighting it in a way in which, like, you yourself have hatred towards those people who you think are hateful? If so, King says, you're not actually helping, right? You ever driven by one of those houses that has a yard sign that says, hate has no home here? Hate might have a home there. You know what I mean, right? Okay. King says that when the opportunity to defeat your enemy presents itself, don't do it. And this might mean, like, there's a moment in this conversation where I could, like, get you, right? Or I could ask you a gotcha question, or I could do this or that online, right? Especially social media. It says, don't do it. Don't do it. You should love your enemy because hate distorts the personality of the hater to the point where, like, you can't even see right. There have been psychologists who have studied this, and when we're motivated by hate, like, our just brains just shut down. Believe that charity can overcome contempt. Both of these forces are incredibly strong, but the first is the stronger of the two. Forgiveness is stronger than revenge, patience stronger than coercion. Finally, King says we should love our enemies because love has within it a redemptive power. Love is a power that eventually transforms individuals. To change someone, and that someone includes yourself. To change someone, King says, you must first love them. And they must know that you love them. So you have to first love them. Think about how different this is than, like, in our modern kind of moment of discourse. Does anybody talk or think this way? That you have to love somebody? It's like, no. You have to own them. You have to destroy them. Right? Those are the videos on YouTube that get the most hits, like, so-and-so, like, destroys, capital D-E-S to it, right? I'm going to click on that. The other 20 million people. King says this is the wrong way to think about it. If you're going to change someone, you must first love them. And it isn't enough that it's just like a feeling inside. You actually have to show that you love them. And they have to know it. How are they going to know it? Among other ways, by the way that you talk to them, by the way that you engage in dialogue with them, by the way that when you are a first-year student, hopefully here, but maybe somewhere else, and you're in a dorm orientation with somebody who sees the world differently, that you remain humble and charitable and curious, and you talk to them in a way that makes clear that you want to get to the truth of the matter, that you see them as a potential friend, that they're your fellow citizens and not your enemies. To change someone, you must first love them, and they must know that you love them. If you want to change the minds of your classmates or your fellow Americans, don't shame them or silence them. First, you must love them. Thank you. It was fun. I left 15 minutes for questions. Oh my goodness. Look at all this. Who's calling? All right, it looked like your hand was up first. Yeah, go ahead. Yes, you.
I was wondering if you had a favorite conversation with, like, in doing this civil discourse with students.
Yeah, I'll tell you about one. I'll try and make it quick because it's kind of complicated to set up. But it was like this. We had a class where we were going to talk about pronouns, whether we have to give them or use them. And I had a student in class who I'd met with outside of class. He was gay, had been somewhat ostracized by the gay community at Duke because he thought there were only two genders. And he was going to, in class, I knew he was going to share this and talk about why he won't use neopronouns. And then another student raised her hand and started talking about kind of LGBTQ stuff. She was conservative, and she talked about, sorry, I know this is taking a long time, but it's a good story. She talked about how she was on the rowing team, and there was like a rainbow jersey she did not want to wear. She's like, I just don't feel comfortable doing this. I don't want to offend anybody, but like, and she was like ostracized by the team. It was pretty ugly. And I was waiting for this other student to raise his hand and kind of tell what I thought he was going to say about pronouns. He didn't say anything. I went up to him after class. I said, what happened? He said, I was really thrown off by what my classmates said. I thought, even Republicans today were fine with like gay marriage, and I was just shocked that she wouldn't wear the jersey. I said, oh, interesting. So you think she should have had to wear it? He said, well, I got to thinking about it. And I thought, if she should have to wear the jersey, maybe I should have to say those pronouns. It's kind of similar. But if I'm right that I shouldn't have to use those pronouns, if that's like compelled speech, something about which reasonable people can disagree, whether there are these other genders, whether I should, then maybe she shouldn't have to wear that jersey. And I don't know which one it is, but I think it's the same answer to both. And I was like, now that is thinking. Now that is real conversation. That was a good moment. For me as a teacher, I'm not trying to get him to conclude one way or the other, but he was thinking. That was great. Yeah, good moment. Yes, please. Go ahead. I'm not like discriminating here. I'm just there in the front, so I got, yeah.
How do you feel the future of international relationships will change with this like lobbying your enemy mindset?
Yeah.
Global politics change?
Yeah. So within higher education, I'm not saying anything like that is everybody, most people know this to be the case. In elite higher education, politically we skew somewhat progressive, for better or for worse. It's not a judgment, it's just an observation. I think one of the interesting arguments to be made for why we should have a bit more viewpoint diversity on campus is on the basis of international relations. Those of you who are from the Global South or have spent time there know that the attitudes of people there are different, often much more religious, often have different feelings about sexuality and marriage and these things. Again, I'm not saying they're right or wrong, just saying this is true. And given the flow of human beings in the world, especially with climate change that's going to increase it, you're going to have a lot of people coming from other parts of the world who see these things differently, and I'm not really sure we're ready for it in higher education. And one thing that's, I don't want to say funny about it, or ironic, is that at these universities we're very much like for global diversity and like thinking things different, and when you have this encounter with people in the third world who have different politics, we kind of don't know what to do, because we're like all for diversity, maybe not that diversity, and we're not sure what to do. It's an awkward moment, and I think we need to prepare for it. Yeah, good question. Yeah, please.
I found it interesting that you were like talking about like how to approach your enemies and how to talk to them. So I have like an interesting question for you. Is the enemy of your enemy your friend?
No. I mean, this is a good question. I mean, one way to think about politics is to say like it's this. This isn't my line, and I'm screwing it up, but it's something like it's the exercise of building alliances around shared enemies. Like, I mean, that is one way to think about what we do with politics. Like, we all don't like them, so, and I mean this domestically and internationally, right? I would instead like us to think about politics in terms of pursuing common good, common ends. And I think this would be more like a charity-based approach to politics rather than it's a zero-sum. One of us is going to lose. You're my enemy or you're my friend. I would rather not think about politics that way. Good question.
There is no right or wrong answer to that, just so you know.
Yeah, what you don't know, that was the writing prompt that half of the group got.
Oh, that's why they laughed. I see.
The group got that as their writing prompt on Saturday.
I see. It's the enemy of my enemy friend. Okay, very good. Very good. Yeah, got it. Yeah, your hand is very high, so I sense that you really got a question.
I'm just curious. You mentioned not coming into certain conversations with, I guess, like preconceived notions and prejudice. Is there any time that maybe you went into something thinking one way and maybe a student or someone you talked to kind of skewed your view on a certain subject?
Yeah, so I am a participant in my classes, though I remain neutral. So the way I teach is I don't take sides, and I try to be really even-handed, and I don't reveal my own politics. I actually don't have strong politics. It makes it easier for me to teach these classes. But to your question, I mean, I am thinking all the time, and sometimes students say something that makes me like rethink things a little bit. And there have been those moments from time to time. I actually think this example I gave earlier was one that I'm like, much like that student, I'm still troubled by. And I'm like tempted to reach out to him. This is like 3 years ago. I'd be like, would you ever decide on that? Because I'm thinking through it too. Yeah, that's my answer. Yes, please. Over here. Yes, in the black and white striped shirt.
So kind of as a follow-up to what you were saying about like zero-sum conflict,
Yeah.
in my view, one of the biggest drivers of political polarization is like the gamification of political discourse, specifically on social media. And you outlined beautifully how to address this on an intersubjective scale, but I'm curious, on a societal level scale, how do you think that we can decrease the gamification of our discourse?
So in the humanities and social sciences, people, and when they talk, I can kind of tell where they are on this, will sometimes think in terms of systems and others in terms of individuals. Okay, this is where this is going. Some people look for solutions to our political problems by changing policy or system. And I think that this can be helpful, but I am of the view that ultimately systems are nothing but individuals making free choices. And that if we want to improve the state of discourse, whether online or in person, we actually have to change what's going on in here. You can't just write a better algorithm or an app. People are trying this to get us to be less addicted to contempt and outrage and all these things. Those are moral failings. And so we have to change ourselves. And if we all do that collectively, that stuff will take care of itself. So I'm like kind of skeptical of the top-down social engineering solution. I think we got ourselves into this mess, and we're going to have to get ourselves out of it. That's what I think. I didn't talk about courage. Courage is very important here, too. Yeah. Yes, right here.
Do you think it's sustainable to continue to engage in discourse with people who have repeatedly shown that they might not be willing to see another perspective, or they only can see their own point of view on a certain issue?
Yes. I mean, I just don't think you have a choice. I don't know what the alternative is. You know, one of the good and bad things about living in a liberal democracy is that we have to persuade our fellow citizens of something, and until we've done that, we just gotta like keep at it. So I'll give an example here. Lincoln debated Douglas about expansion of slavery into the new territories. Lincoln knew slavery was morally heinous. He had to do it because a decent portion of the country agreed with Douglas. So he had to, like, you know, sit across from him like a gentleman and talk to him, right? Thank God we don't have to do this today, right? Half the country no longer has the power any democratic power to push back. But if, I'll take a different example. If today you feel strongly about the issue of abortion, whether you're pro-life or pro-choice, you have to concede that there are people of goodwill and sound mind of some number who think differently, and you have to keep trying to persuade each other. Even if the other side is just like, you're not hearing me, like you're being mean, and you, literally, what is the point of this? The point is, we're citizens in a democracy, and you need to keep talking to them, no matter how they treat you, right? I think that's just, I can make a practical argument, but in my remarks, I've also made a moral argument for why it's actually not good for you to engage in polemics and engage in a kind of like domination tactic. I don't think it's good for people. Yeah, right here.
Have you ever thought of becoming a politician?
No. Yeah. Becoming a politician. So I went to divinity school. I briefly thought I would be a minister. Then I became Catholic. I briefly thought maybe I'm going to be a priest. And then I met my wife, and she had other ideas. Priests are celibate. Others? Was that inappropriate? I don't know.
I had a really interesting discussion about Israel and Palestine with some fellow Jewish students yesterday evening. And I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on how to disagree productively or with love within a certain group that feels so strongly and feels so tied to a certain issue for either different reasons or for who empathizes differently for different reasons.
Yeah. As it happens, I'm co-teaching a class on Israel and Palestine this semester. In fact, on Saturday, we're flying over to Israel and going into Palestine. Class has proven a little controversial on campus. But I think that this is, like, right now, maybe the hardest issue to discuss. And it is because, I think in part, both sides feel an existential threat. Like there's nothing scarier than the thought that another group of people simply wants to eliminate you and your people, right? And when that happens, when that mindset is the mindset, you know, stuff like be charitable and be humble, like forget that. Like we're just trying to survive. You know, we can do civil discourse later, Dr. Rose. This is like naive stuff for the academy. But I would return to what I said earlier when I said it's crucial in those moments when one side seems to have lost sight of your group's dignity and humanity, that you can't lose sight of theirs. It's so hard. It is so hard. We have to keep talking. Honestly, we don't have any other choice. I think in the end, if you haven't persuaded a group of people and given them I allow a lot of emotions in my class. I think anger's fine. The one emotion I think is just like poison is contempt. Contempt is the emotion in which you express that you are like beneath me. Remember, it's like the opposite of friend, come up higher. Like we are not. I want you gone. I want you gone. This country, this region would be better if you just weren't here. When you have that emotion and you express it, you're never going to come to peace with other people. You're not. And so this would be, I haven't really given you an answer. You should come to my class today, 3:30, and see what we do. Yeah, others?
Rose, we have time for maybe 2 more questions.
2 more questions. Okay, yeah, there you go.
Thank you. Good morning, Dr. Rose. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah.
I'm tempted to ask you if you should judge a book by its cover, but I'm not going to ask you that.
Okay.
But
No.
I was wondering if you could speak on a time where you felt that you had to de-escalate a particularly emotionally charged situation, and your advice for handling situations that are more immediate and close to home.
Yeah, I have one that I should have and I didn't. Is that okay? Okay. We were doing, you can tell in my class we don't shy away from hard issues. We were discussing transgender athletes, and I had somebody in who is a professor of law who has taken kind of like if you were to look at our country, kind of a middle of the road position. She would identify as liberal, but thought that these athletes should have to undergo a certain period of hormone therapy before they can compete, and to balance fairness and inclusion. Anyway, I had this student who. By the way, in my class we always practice Chatham House rules, so I never put names to things that are said. So I'm talking about students here. You'll never figure out who this was. Anyways, the student was visibly upset, and because this professor had been using the phrase biological sex in her remarks, to distinguish it from self-identified gender, whatever. And anyways, the student got really mad and raised his hand and basically said, you're not a scientist. I'm a biology major. You don't know what you're talking about. There's no such thing as biological sex. Da 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 da. And it was a really tough moment for me as a teacher, because I try not to intervene, and sometimes people will ask me oh, you allow anything? What if somebody denies global warming or something like this? There are sometimes that are and it's rare, there are kind of facts where I have to say, yeah, technically that's not true. 97% of abortions aren't in the 3rd trimester. I have to say that, whatever it is. And this was kind of one of those moments. And it was really hard. It kind of happened. It happened in real time, right? And like it was cringe. And the student was disrespecting her. And anyways, before I could even like fix the situation, he stormed off. It was the end of class. And that speaker did not come back to my class for like 2 years. She only recently came back. And I had to mend that relationship. And it was really, and I still think about like, what should I have done differently in the moment? I did reach out to the student and got coffee with him and tried to kind of explain, why I didn't think that was respectful or whatever. But it's hard. I mean, being human is hard. Like, you don't always. This is one thing I'll say about civil discourse, whether you're going to teach it or take it, do it, whatever, is that just because you have moments like that doesn't mean you shouldn't keep going. Because I think this is what discourages people. They're like, but what about when it goes wrong? What about when life goes wrong? It's going to. And you got to get back up and keep going. It's the same with civil discourse. You're going to have those moments. It's like, oh, gosh. Ugh. And then you got to keep going. You got to keep talking. You got to keep the conversation going. Just like you got to keep getting out of bed. One more question. Gosh. Yes, right here in the purple. Yes.
Hey, so I know you mentioned something about, the solution with the whole social media and the polarization in America. But like I know you said it starts morally, but America, we all have so many different morals because we're so diverse.
Yep.
So how would be like a literal sense of fixing the solution, like maybe starting it in the classroom and, implementing civil discourse and making it federal? That way everybody has the opportunity to have these conversations or get the lecture that you're giving us.
Yeah. So one of America's strength is our pluralism, right? Like we're diverse. It's also, one isn't supposed to say this in the academy, it's also our weakness in the sense you were just kind of pointing at, which is like when we all have such different worldviews and such morals, how do we do business together? How do we agree politically? How do we build communities? I have chosen to take a virtue-based approach to my teaching because in my experience, whatever your tradition, and some of us don't have any traditions, not religious, whatever, is that's a language everybody understands. Like I don't know any culture anywhere where they admire cowardice, right? And I think that everybody understands what's attractive about being honest or charitable. And so that's a good place to start. It's not going to get you everything you want as far as you want all the time. It's still going to lead to disagreements, but it's at least gives us a kind of grammar and a political vocabulary that might help us work together even when we see the world differently in a kind of common morality. That's really what I've tried. I'm Christian, and there are times in the classroom where I'd like to be a little bit more specific, but this is not the place, it's not the time. But talking virtue, it seems to me people get. I occasionally have that student who's like, I think morality is relative, and I think there's no such thing as virtue, and then I'll say, all right, I'll give you a bad grade. That's unfair. That's what I thought. Okay. I would never give someone a bad grade for their view. That was just to get him to realize there's this thing called justice, right? I think we are out of time. Okay, thank you so much. That was really fun.